have an opportunity to speak to this need for all that we all have in our hearts for love and connection and peace in ourselves, in our community, in our country, and in the world. So I've really enjoyed that just these last couple of last week or so, and just meditating on really politics as a sacred activity. You know, so often we're in a position where we just have a bad taste in our mouth a lot of times because what's the conversation that's happening around the country is distasteful. It's divisive, and it's just full of acrimony. And I really, my goal and my motivation in joining this campaign, and as long as I've known Tulsi for almost a decade now, has just been because she brings such a breath of fresh air and such a human perspective to this work that we're doing, which is really coming together and figuring out how we live together, how we work together, how we talk to each other, and how we come to agreements and move forward in the best interests of everybody. And that's really what politics should be about, and that is a sacred endeavor. So, how are we doing over there? All right. Well, without further ado, do we have somebody introducing her? Am I introducing somebody? I don't know. Without further ado, Vince is our amazing regional coordinator and a super volunteer who put all of this together. So I'm going to let him introduce our guest of honor tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. If you'll all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll keep it short. Chris, what are you doing to me? We got a lot of people here tonight, and I want to thank Ella Reap in the back for helping us last minute. Thank you, Ella. So listen, I could tell you all about Tulsi, the fact that she's the youngest legislator in her state at age 21, the fact that she's the only woman to finish with distinguished honors at the Alabama Military School. She did that at the age 26, by the way. I think most of us know what she did in 2015, stepping down from a position of power to do the integrity move. But I'll just tell you a couple things about her character, and not from my words, from people across the political spectrum. So if there are any libertarians in here, Ron Paul said, there we go. Earlier this year, he said Tulsi was by far the very, very best on foreign policy. Check. Any conservatives? Yep. Very good. So we got Trey Gowdy, former Republican from South Carolina, I believe. She calls Tulsi the most Christian woman in Congress. If you know Tulsi, that's funny. And then, of course, just not to leave everyone out, Bill Maher, prominent liberal, said that Tulsi is the only candidate that doesn't play to the Twitterati. So all bases covered, and when it comes to uniting the people, I think we have a solid candidate here. So without further ado, please help me welcome Representative Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. It's great to see you all here. Thank you very much for taking the time. Some old friends and a lot of new ones. Really, really am grateful. Belated Merry Christmas. We're glad to be back here in New Hampshire. I want to thank Caitlin and all of the volunteers here. Ella, thank you for your help. Making this evening possible. I want to thank our two officers here who are making sure we are all safe tonight. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service. And I want to start our conversation tonight really picking up off of the Pledge of Allegiance. We say this Pledge of Allegiance on the floor of the House of Representatives at the very beginning of the opening of session every single day. It is led different days by different members of Congress who stand there, as we all do, with our hand over our heart, reciting the pledge as we did here tonight, standing together, Democrats and Republicans, saying one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. These words can kind of become rote sometimes as we've repeated them so many times over our lives, but I just think it's so important that we reflect on the meaning of these words. Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I just went back and read the speech that Abraham Lincoln gave 161 years ago that many at that time said was way too controversial for him to deliver, where he stated very strongly and clearly that a house divided against itself cannot stand. I think those words are so important for us to remember, given how divided our country is today. There are so many different issues that we are concerned about, and I'm so proud and grateful of the fact that every single one of our campaign events, whether it's a small group or a larger group, we have Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, conservatives, progressives, people who place themselves at all parts of the political spectrum, but who are gathering together really because we care about our country, that we love this country, and we understand that it is only we, the people, who can begin to heal our nation so that we may move forward together. That it is only through having the kinds of dialogue and conversation that we are having in our town halls across the country, that we are having in living rooms and around dining tables across the country, that we can increase better understanding, share different perspectives that maybe we hadn't heard or considered before, as we focus on how we can solve problems together. Unfortunately, what we see in Washington is that these conversations just aren't happening. We have one side pitted against the other, one team against the other, one tribe against the other, whether it's based on political affiliation, race, ethnicity, religion, orientation. You can go down the laundry list of how increasingly, unfortunately, divided our country has become. This is what Abraham Lincoln warned us against. And these are words that we have to take to heart if we have hope for the country that we know and love to be able to continue to move forward together, to thrive and to prosper. Unless we, the people, begin this process to heal the nation, then unfortunately we will continue to move in the wrong direction. And what is the result of that? We will continue to have leaders who are more concerned about preserving their power and their interests rather than serving the interests of the people. When I was first elected to Congress in 2012, I knew what I was walking into, and even then, almost 8 years ago, how divided and hyper-partisan the environment was in Washington. But it really still struck me that when I went there, that at that time there were 84 members of Congress elected in that election. There were 50 Democrats, 34 Republicans, and for the first couple of weeks that we were there, we were shuttled around in these big buses. We went to these orientation meetings. We were given maps of the Capitol and shown, here's how you get your ID card, all of the basic kind of logistics things, ethics training, all of these different things. And we got to know each other, which was great. We got to hang out a little. We got to share meals together, learn more about each other's families, where we came from, the different experiences that we brought to Congress. I thought, okay, cool. What do you want to work on? We started talking about different issues and concerns that we shared and started to make plans of legislation that we could introduce together. Until a few short weeks after we got there, the separation began. where instead of continuing to gather together, Democrats went into one conference room, Republicans went into another conference room. The leaders of our respective parties came and started to brief us in separate rooms, but really what we found out later was they were delivering largely the same message, which was, okay, this is our team. We're here to beat their team, and here's how we're going to do it. Here's how many hours a day you are going to have to spend fundraising and calling lobbyists and trying to get more PAC checks for your re-election campaign. Here are the candidates, here are the other members of Congress that we really don't want you working with because they're on the other team and we want to beat them. We don't want to make them look good by actually passing legislation together. The partisanship message was drilled in from the very beginning. And as we started talking to my Republican friends, we heard that they were getting the same message. So rather than looking at, okay, how can we work together to pass legislation to begin immigration reform? You know, how could we work together to pass legislation to help improve the healthcare system? Each of these attempts were often stymied by the leadership of both of our parties for different reasons, but really those reasons kind of went back to the core interest of, well, if we do this, it's gonna help the other team. And we don't want to do that. Putting the interests of partisanship ahead of the interests of actually solving the problems that people are struggling and suffering and trying to deal with all across this country. This is worse than disheartening to me. And more as we're traveling this country and we're hearing stories. Last night we were at someone's house who hosted a gathering for us in Amherst, and there was a woman who came and who talked about her daughter who has cystic fibrosis and how she's grateful that there's a brand new medicine that will tremendously help her daughter and so many other people who are suffering with CF, but that it costs something like $300,000 for a year's supply of medicine. $300,000. And so I was impressed, and so she said, you know, we're just grateful for this medicine and grateful for our community because the whole community started chipping in whatever they could to help pay for her daughter's medicine. That's not what, that situation shouldn't even exist. It shouldn't exist. But it does, because rather than Democrats and Republicans coming together, yes, bringing very different ideas on how we can better improve our healthcare system, on how we can better make sure that our children or our neighbors or our loved ones, family members are able to get the care and medicine they need. Instead, it's more about, well, how can we make sure that we win more seats in the next election and hold on to power or regain power, depending on which side you're on. There are very clear ramifications with this broken system of governance that we have, with this pay-to-play culture in Washington, where if you've got the money and you've got the high-powered lobbyists, then you have the influence and you have the seat at the table where the policies are being written that impact us. That impact us. So what do? How do we change this? You're here tonight because you are the change, and you recognize that this isn't someone else's problem, that this is our opportunity, we the people, yes, across party lines, to take a stand with each other and for each other, to bring about this systemic change that we need to see, to ensure that our leaders are those who are committed solely to one mission, that mission of service. Service to the people of this country, putting country and the American people above all else. This is something that people say, well, this is impossible. And I've heard there was a young woman, she's in college, and she came to one of our events and talking about these things. And afterwards, she came up to me, she's like, it's just not possible. It can't be done. And it broke my heart to hear her express this hopelessness, because of what she has grown up with and seen throughout her life about how we've just gone farther and farther and farther in the wrong direction, that she's just saying, you know what, my voice doesn't matter, my vote doesn't matter, and there's no way that we can ever again become the United States of America. And so we had a few words with each other. We shared a few words. And I just reminded her that in this democracy, as imperfect and challenging as it may be, still, the way that we bring about this change is when we make sure that our voices are heard. When we lift our voices up and remind those in positions of power that no matter how much money they have, no matter how great the obstacles are that they place before us, still, it is we, the people, who make the decisions about who is in those positions, who we hire and who we fire. I go back to, and I shared with her, you know, how we can overcome these divides. I go back to just the experience that I've had serving in the military. From the very first day showing up at basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where all of us, there were probably over 100, maybe 125 of us lined up around this big room, the drill sergeants walking around, all of us standing in the position of attention, and seeing the diversity in this room, people from all parts of the country, people of all different ages, races, ethnicities, religions, representing the diverse fabric of who we are as a country. But we were all there for one reason. We were all there because every single one of us raised our right hand and volunteered to serve our country, took an oath to support and defend our Constitution, and that no matter all of the different things that made us unique from one another, the different experiences that we had, the different agreements or disagreements we may have on politics or religion or anything else, that we were there for one reason and one reason alone, that we stood shoulder to shoulder, prepared to lay our lives down in service to our country, to put service above self. It is the example that is set by our men and women in uniform that must inspire our leaders in government to be reminded that we are elected, entrusted with this incredible responsibility to serve by every single one of you, and must remain focused on that mission and that mission alone. This is what you deserve. This is what our founders envisioned for our country. When they spoke of a government of, by, and for the people, this is what they were talking about. Not a government of, by, and for the special interests or the powerful elite or one group over another group. No, a government of, by, and for the people, encouraging vigorous debate, encouraging a diverse set of ideas and opinions coming to the forefront so that we can find that common ground, so that we can bring about what those best ideas are and begin to move forward to make progress that serves the best interests of the American people. When I first got elected to Congress, I was told that as a freshman Democrat in the Republican majority, that I shouldn't even try to pass legislation because it couldn't happen. There was no way they were going to let my bills come to the floor for a vote. I refused to accept that as a fact and tried to think about, okay, well, how can I, in a very practical way, begin to bridge these divides? How can I start to reach out and develop relationships with my new colleagues so that we could work together? I called my mother in Hawaii, and I asked her, she makes this amazing macadamia nut toffee. I asked if she would make 434 boxes of toffee for every single one of my new friends and colleagues, because what is more universal than food, right? Opens up your heart, opens up your belly. And my parents, by the way, today they're celebrating their 51st anniversary. And amazing, amazing. My mom thought it was a great idea, and she said, yes, of course, I'm very happy to help. I asked her then, I said, I have one more favor. I asked if she would make another 435 larger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress. And she paused only for a moment. I knew she was thinking about how much longer it would take, how many more macadamia nuts she'd need to go buy. But she agreed to do it because she understood why it was important. And while she was doing that in Hawaii, she's stirring 2 pots of toffee at the same time. My dad was the quality control officer. He took 1 slice out of every single pan that she poured. And I was in Washington just starting to handwrite personal notes to every member of Congress and learning more about them, signing every single one of these notes, saying, I look forward to serving with you. You're going to see a bowl being passed around. This is the toffee wrapped in gold. Oh, it's not. Never mind. She just took the whole bowl. So you can taste the magic of Mom's macadamia nut toffee. But the really incredible thing was that as we started to deliver this toffee around to my colleagues in Congress, very quickly, as I was going to the House floor for votes, members of Congress started coming and trying to find me. Republicans, chairmen of powerful committees, making that long walk from the Republican side of the floor to the Democrat side, finding me and just saying thank you. Many of them saying I ate all the candy and I need more before I can go home this weekend. But then most importantly, just saying, tell me what's going on in your district. Tell me what are the issues that your constituents are most concerned about. You know, I'm the chair of this committee, or I'm working on this issue or that issue. Let's find a way to work together. They didn't know me very well. I didn't know them very well. But because of this simple gesture of reaching out with respect, without preconditions, without a purity test, without singling people out because of one reason or another, reaching out to every single one, saying, let's serve together. This built an incredibly strong foundation of relationships that allowed me to do my job, to be effective as a member of Congress, to pass legislation in my very first year in office with the Republican majority, to pass provisions, amendments to bills that people said were impossible because the Republican leadership wouldn't allow it. Well, these amendments passed because when they came for a vote to the floor, instead of people just voting in lockstep with their party, we had established a relationship that created an opening for me to say, hey, here's why this is important. Here's why I think you should vote for it. And because that respect was there, that trust had been established, they knew I wasn't going to lie to them, they knew I wasn't going to try to screw them over, and that I was going to tell them the truth, and they could then make their decision accordingly. And in many cases, I was able to effectively make that argument that earned the support from a lot of my Republican colleagues who normally otherwise would have just voted the other way because there's a D next to my name. This is the kind of example of leadership that I would bring as president, giving you my personal commitment that I will treat every single American with respect, that I will lead in this same fashion, reaching out to leaders from all different political parties, starting these dialogues, having these conversations about how we can best work through the many different challenges and issues that we face in this country, always putting the interest and the well-being of the American people first. This is what must be done, because no matter how great our plans are, no matter how huge our ideas are about how we want to solve and tackle these problems, in our system of governance, the executive branch must work with the legislative branch. No one person can do it alone. Working together with leaders from across party lines is essential to being able to solve these problems. I have a proven track record of doing so over the last 7 years in Congress, and I will bring that experience and these relationships to the White House to make sure that we are beginning this process of healing our nation, to make sure that our White House is once again a beacon of light, of respect, integrity, and opportunity for every single American. Now, Abraham Lincoln in that speech that he gave 161 years ago, he closed that speech saying, "We shall not fail. If we stand firm, we shall not fail." Failure is not an option. Failure is not an option. We, the people, we must stand together for each other, for our country, and for our future. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I look forward to our conversation that we'll have here tonight. Thank you for coming. We've got a few microphones that will be running around. If you've got a question or a thought that you'd like to share. We've got Vince here in the back. Yes, sir. We'll start with you.
Okay. Can you hear?
What's your name?
My name is Michael Johnson.
Nice to meet you, Michael.
Nice to meet you. And I've had the fortunate in travels to go to Seattle, to San Francisco. It was years ago. And I guess what concerns me is the homelessness.
Yes.
Both in terms of, it could be high rent, it can be medical reasons, it can be the drugs, and it's just all the services. And so how to go forward with, I guess, addressing that, but without, I guess, say, breaking the bank, in other words.
Yeah.
And so I guess how.
Thank you, Michael. This really is a problem, unfortunately, that is not only hitting the major cities, some of them that you've mentioned. There still continues to be a problem in a lot of these cities, but it's also a problem that's hitting a lot of rural communities as well. And you've listed some of the reasons why. I think one of the major drivers that statistics are showing for the increasing homeless rate is the decreasing number of truly affordable housing units actually available for people. Again, different price points in different communities, but we were in Hampton not too long ago, and I had a chance to speak to two older women who were concerned about a lack of senior housing in their own community and how they kept getting pushed out of different communities that they were living in because they just couldn't afford the rent anywhere. Mental health services, substance abuse. There are a lot of different drivers of the increasing rates of homelessness we're seeing in the country. My home state of Hawaii, we have the highest per capita homeless rate in the nation, and we have an incredibly high cost of living. What do we do about this? Look, on each of these levels, there has to be a very strong partnership between the federal, state, and local levels of government, along with the private sector. I served on the city council before I ran for Congress, one of the largest city councils in the country. My single district alone, I had over about 100,000 constituents just in my single district. And working at that level, you have an incredible power and ability to be able to help solve this problem through zoning, planning, and permitting to make sure that you have the right rules in place to increase the flexibility for developing, whether they're tiny homes or container homes, or really being creative in how we can bring down the cost of really truly affordable housing units while quickly being able to increase that number. This requires some funding from the federal level and the state level as well, and working with private developers, those who are looking to develop more of their either market rate units or luxury units, that as they develop those, one thing that we've done in Hawaii is they must also develop a certain number of affordable units at the same time. Yeah, they may get a tax break here or there, but you make it so that it's we're creating the incentive to build more of these affordable units in the process with a true partnership in place. Look, with substance abuse and the lack of mental health services, these are two issues that it requires more investment. Some of it has to do with just making sure that our healthcare system actually is providing healthcare, which includes mental health, which includes being able to actually provide assistance to those who are dealing with substance abuse and addiction, so they're getting that help, rather than too often what we're seeing is they're cycling through emergency rooms because they can't get help anywhere else, which is further driving up the cost of healthcare overall, or worse yet, they're getting stuck in our criminal justice system, which is not helping them, and it's further driving up the cost for taxpayers. So we've got to take kind of a whole of government approach to being able to work with nonprofits and community organizations who are often on the front lines of doing all that they can to help provide help for these folks. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Tulsi.
Hi.
My question is about gender pay gap, and maybe you could shed some light on why is it that we are days away from 2020 and women on average still work at a 20% discount to men when they may have an equal amount of education and adequate experience, comparable experience, and why isn't there sweeping legislation to actually make it, frankly, legal?
Yeah. Thank you. There is sweeping legislation. Congress needs to pass it, and it needs to be enforced so that this is the societal norm, that we get away from this archaic way of thinking from the past and recognize that everyone, men or women, should be paid equally for the same level of experience and for doing the same work, period. I think the more that this issue is coming to the forefront, the more conversations that are being had, the more the expectations are being raised where this is not going to be accepted silently anymore. So really, it's a very basic thing in my view, where legislatively it needs to pass, it needs to be signed into law, but also for employers and people within our own communities need to make sure that this is the norm that employers need to abide by. Yes, sir.
For coming out tonight, a representative.
Thank you.
So I'm a senior at Boston College. Go Eagles! And
All right. What are you majoring in?
political science and economics.
Okay.
So I've been thinking a lot about student loan debt. I know a lot of the candidates have talked about this issue, like which is now reaching over $1.5 trillion. I wanted to hear what you would do to address this crippling issue in our country.
Can I ask you a question first? I'm curious, what do you want to do with your degree?
Oh.
What
Well,
do you want to do for work?
Well, I definitely want to get into like policy research, definitely in the public sector, hopefully. But I'm on the job market right now. You know, like it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for your question. I was just reading an article about this today where a parent had written an op-ed saying that they had encouraged their child not to go to a fancy college and to be realistic about what kind of education they could afford because of this massive amount of debt that people are taking on just trying to get an education. I think there's a really important thing that is not being talked about as we deal with this issue that must be addressed, which is why is the cost of education continuing to rapidly increase over time, year after year after year? We're seeing tuitions and all the other costs of higher education increasing, but we're seeing more and more students like yourself on the verge of graduation and really struggling to find a job, period. What to speak of find a good paying job in the field of your choosing. So the bottom line is the costs are increasing, but the outcomes are not commensurate with that high cost, where you're not graduating with a guarantee that, okay, you and maybe your family have invested a certain amount of money in your education, but you're not walking out knowing you're walking directly into a good paying job. And so this is a serious problem that we've got to address. And so long as we have taxpayer dollars going to subsidize higher education to one level or another, there's got to be some oversight and accountability there of where those dollars are going. I hear from a lot of professors who say, well, it's certainly not going to my paycheck, that a lot of it is going to higher and higher administrative costs, and again, without a whole lot of transparency and accountability. So number one, we've got to get to the root cause of why is there an increasing cost. Number two, I think that we are highly utilizing technology and the internet and innovation and how that can really rapidly increase access to higher education and training while drastically bringing down the cost. I think there's a lot of potential there that has not even yet begun to be explored. And I think we also need to look at how we can encourage those to, more people to go into fields of public service. Things like teaching. I was with some teachers earlier this morning who were teachers. She's saying it's getting so hard to teach that she can't even recommend to any young people she knows to teach. And it's hard, right? It's a struggle. And how sad is that when we really, and that's one of the reasons why it's hard, is there's not enough teachers. There's not enough help. There's not enough resources going into our schools. And so those are areas, teaching, nursing, school counselors, mental health counselors, a lot of different areas that are necessary to fill the gaps in our communities that we should be further incentivizing and offering help for, whether it's tuition assistance, forgiveness, or otherwise. Those are things that we can do to better strengthen and fulfill the needs of our community. And the last thing on this is just investing. I think we need to invest a whole lot more in vocational training and apprenticeship, knowing that that's not getting a bachelor's degree and a master's degree isn't for everybody, which is cool, totally cool. You are not less than if you don't have that piece of paper. If you want to get into something else, you should have the opportunity to be able to do so and be seen in the same eyes as anybody else. So there's got to be a multifaceted approach to how we tackle this. And I think there's some creative ideas we can look forward, like a gentleman last night, he said, well, what if you go in and you say, okay, give 2 years, you were there last night, give 2 years of service, whether it be through the military, you've got the GI Bill, but let's say it's through the Peace Corps, Teach for America, or a number of other of these opportunities, expand them and say you give 2 years of service to your country, and then you'll get 2 years of your tuition forgiven. Something along those lines. So I think there's a creative way that we can look at this while addressing the root cause of the problem, while also making sure that we are helping further strengthen the needs of our communities and our country. Thank you.
Excuse me, I just want to make an announcement. There's a silver or a gray Mazda outside with mask plates. Your lights are on.
Uh-oh. That could end badly. Yes, sir. We'll start with you.
So one of the things that we're seeing is the privatization of more and more aspects of government. I mean, we started privatizing the military about 30 years ago, and that's ended so well for us. But, I mean, even now, roads, bridges, toll roads, highways, all of this, more and more, the government is selling itself to the private sector and putting them in charge of things that have traditionally been the purview of communities and states and cities and municipalities. Even the federal government seems to be getting into this. I mean, one of the things that both sides have been talking about in Washington is the idea of public-private partnerships for infrastructure and so forth. But I have a problem with somebody owning the road that goes past my house or the bridge that I have to drive over to go into a city. And I'm just curious as to your thoughts about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, you know, public-private partnership in and of itself is not a bad word. We've just got to look at and be judicious about how and where it's used. I don't believe that government necessarily should be in the business of housing, for example. And so the example that we talked about earlier, I think that's where it does make sense. People who build houses or apartment buildings for a living know better how to operate and manage those, and that's where those partnerships come into play. But I agree that there's not really a profit incentive for a company to come in and make sure they're building a road that's safe for public use in transportation. I think there are different models and different ways to look at what a public-private partnership would, how that would look in like an infrastructure funding plan. But in certain areas where we're dealing with safety for the community, public utilities, for example, that government has the responsibility to have that oversight and accountability when if things go wrong or when things go wrong, because that the government works for the people. We are the shareholders for our government. And I think that's how we can best measure what and where these kinds of partnerships are appropriate or not.
And I guess the only other thing that I would ask about is the current president, contradicting what happened under the Obama administration, has decided he wants to support privatization of prisons. Once again, on the federal level, the states have been doing it all along. I'm just curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah, I have long been strongly against private prisons. Again, this is one where clearly it just doesn't make sense that you would have a business model that's centered around keeping cells full, keeping prison beds full. And instead, we should keep it in the public jurisdiction and enact the kinds of reforms that can reduce recidivism rates, that are making it so that people who are in prison are serving their time, have served their time when they go home, that they are best equipped to be successful with their families and their communities, and that we stop this cycle that we have seen for so long that's broken the criminal justice system, that's broken so many families and caused a lot of hardship for a lot of people, where no one wins in that process. Thank you. Take someone in the back there. Yes, sir. Yep.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I'm a registered independent here in New Hampshire, and I have historically voted Republican, but I'm throwing my support behind you.
Thank you.
One of the most polarizing issues that really divides the Democrats and Republicans is the issue of abortion. And you have been quoted saying that you believe abortion should be legal, safe, and rare.
Yes.
And it is indeed legal and safe in America. I would say it's not rare. So I would ask you to elaborate on what you mean by rare, and as President Tulsi, what legislation you would support to ensure that abortion is in fact rare.
You know, this is, you're right, this is one of the most polarizing issues, but really when you take the politics out of it, I think what we're left with is what I would imagine is one of the most difficult decisions that a woman is faced with. And what we can and should do, I believe, is to focus on overall health care, focus on providing many different options and alternatives as a woman is going through this decision-making process, ultimately understanding that this decision is hers to make. I have also said that I believe that restrictions in the third trimester make sense, that abortion should not be an option in the third trimester unless the life of the woman or extreme health consequences of the woman is at risk. This is not just a function of government to address what you're talking about. I think this is something that will continue to be an issue for us as a society to address. You know, it's a deeply personal thing, but there are many people who have very strongly held views on both sides of, or on, I should say, on all sides of this this debate. And like so many of these other issues that we talked about, we can get past the polarization if we're willing to have a conversation and not cast those who disagree with the choices that we make as evil. Because once that happens, and unfortunately we're seeing it happen in so many different issues across our politics today, once that happens, then there is no conversation to be had. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Tulsi. I work with Green.
I'm coming to you next. Don't worry. All right. No. Billy. Don't take the mic out of her hand. We'll take her first, then we'll go to her next. Sorry.
So it's all right. I work with Greenpeace twice a month, and they're talking about the Green New Deal, and I'm trying to educate them about the Off Fossil Fuel Act.
Yes.
They're going to be making decisions about who they would recommend. They didn't like my chat. It was like off topic. Can you just address climate change?
Can I? Yeah, I will. I'd love to talk about that. I'm curious about why they didn't appreciate
Well, when you chat something, And they're setting up, they actually are just going to start encouraging people to register to vote, but I believe the end game is for them to recommend a few candidates.
Yeah, got it.
About climate change. So could
Okay.
you just briefly, I mean, I have some information, Margaret did a
Yeah.
whole training
Yeah.
on the two.
Yeah.
But would you just in general talk about climate
Sure,
change? I mean, it's
absolutely.
urgent.
It is.
Thank you.
It is urgent environmental threats that we are facing here at home, and that everybody who lives on this planet is facing in one way, shape, or another. Look, the words climate change are unfortunately words that have also become very polarizing, where on the one hand you may have people who are doing work like you are about trying to raise awareness and information around the threats that we face, seeing them as very real, and others who are saying, hey, look, this whole thing is just a big hoax. So one thing that I try to do is just, okay, take away those words, set them on the side, and let's just look at the things that are important to us all and that are necessary for us all to live and survive. At the most basic level, we all need clean water to drink, to survive. Without water, there is no life anywhere. We need clean air to breathe. We want to make sure that, you know, I grew up in a very beautiful place in Hawaii, place that as a kid, I didn't have to be taught or told, you must protect this place. It was something that, you know, it's my playground, it's my home. Of course, I want to do all that I can to protect it. We want to make sure that we protect these places for our kids and their kids for generations to come. And so then that leads us to, okay, well, what are the things that are creating these threats? What are some of the changes that we can make to protect our planet, to protect our water and air? And that's where I think we can find a lot more common ground to start this conversation about where are the action points that we can take. So some of those action points that are addressed in my legislation include ending which by the way is distinct from the Green New Deal in that it's actually a bill, it's not a resolution. There are clear steps to be taken rather than just setting goals. Having legislation and passing legislation is really what it's going to take to be able to make these changes. Ending the nearly $30 billion a year in subsidies that we as taxpayers are still paying to support this archaic fossil fuel industry, even as they're raking in profits. And instead looking at how we can better use those taxpayer dollars to help invest in and incentivize and empower innovation and technology towards sustainable and a green renewable energy economy, creating good paying jobs in the process, taking away this notion that we have a choice between either having a strong economy or protecting our environment. This is often the false choice that's given to us as there are different decisions being made about where our taxpayer dollars are going or how our policies are being implemented. We can and we need to have both. And I think the beauty of this argument is that we can be self-sustaining as a country when it comes to energy and energy security, and that by transitioning off of fossil fuels and investing in green renewable energy, we are actually bringing down the cost of what we are paying, and we are stabilizing those costs where we're no longer having to be reliant on what's happening in the Middle East to determine what our cost of energy and fuel is going to be. This will require some time and work to be able to make this transition, but as we're seeing in the private sector already, the market is already shifting in this direction because people are more and more saying, hey, we got to do this, and we will vote with our dollars. And so whether it's the auto industry or the electricity utilities, they're looking towards making these kinds of investments. So we need to accelerate that and move that along. The other piece that doesn't get talked about often enough, but is a huge contributor to these environmental threats we face is agriculture. You know, seeing multinational agribusiness corporations, they're coming in and using practices that are contaminating and polluting our water, ruining our soil quality and emitting more carbon into the atmosphere, creating more problems, when there are very real and proven solutions like regenerative farming and others that will not only not have a negative effect, but can do a lot towards recapturing this carbon from the environment. The third thing is just as, if not even more important than the changes that we need to see here at home, which is working with other countries. For those of you who've been listening to anything that I've been saying throughout this campaign, you've heard me say that foreign policy is domestic policy. This is true in so many ways, to include addressing climate change. Because unless we are engaging with other countries, working with other nations, whether it be China or Russia or India or the Philippines or other nations, to address this common and shared concern around climate change, then we will never begin to even scratch the surface of doing what needs to be done at a global level to address this environmental threat. So maximizing diplomacy and engagement with other countries is necessary for so many reasons, because while we will have differences that we need to work out and it may require tough negotiations, there are also many areas of shared and common interest that allow us to work towards a win-win solution, where what is serving the best interests of the American people is also serving the best interests of people in these other countries and the world as a whole. Yes.
Hi, my name is Cecilia. I was just wondering if you could speak to why you didn't vote for or against the impeachment of Donald Trump, and how we can trust you to make such important decisions as president if you couldn't commit to that.
Thank you. My vote was not one of indecisiveness. My voting present was actually taking a very strong stand for the people and against the hyper-partisanship in Washington. It was not a vote that I took lightly. It was something a decision that I came to after doing my due diligence of going through all the documents that came from the committee hearings that were held, and going through some of the Federalist Papers, looking back at some of the warnings that our founders had for us when they were talking about impeachment. And Alexander Hamilton stating his concern, his very real concern, that impeachment, and I'm paraphrasing here, but that impeachment may become something where the result is determined more by the strength of one party or another, rather than an objective and true determination of innocence or guilt. This is something that at a very practical level will only further divide the country. And in this situation, look, I think Trump needs to be removed from office. It's why I'm running for president, to defeat him. I do not think he is fit to serve as president. It's why I'm running for president, to defeat him. Going through this impeachment process will not remove Trump from office. I hear from a lot of people, that's all they care about. We got to get rid of him. We got to get rid of him. Well, guess what? Impeachment's not going to do that. It's not going to do that, because eventually I believe this will get to the Senate. Republicans have already stated very clearly they will not vote to remove him from office, which means the result is that Trump will then go to his rallies and give speeches saying, hey, look, I went through their process and I'm innocent. His support will likely increase. It is more likely that the House Democrats will lose seats to Republicans, and it is more likely that Trump is in a stronger position to win in the next election. I believe very firmly that the best and most powerful way to make a statement about the direction our country needs to go into and accountability for this president is for we, the people, to cast our votes in the ballot box to make sure that there is no question, about what we want for our country. And that's what I think we need to do. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Mark Linn, born and raised in California, a Republican, now a Libertarian. You're going to be the first Democrat that I vote for president.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service to the country. And I just want to find out, when are we going to end these endless wars in the Middle East and bring these resources back home to America for infrastructure, healthcare, and education?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. This is a good note to close out our conversation on, because, you know, sir, as you were talking about how do we do things without breaking the bank, talking about public-private partnerships, how do we pay for infrastructure, how do we pay for healthcare, for education, for better pay for our teachers, for better tools for our kids, how do we pay for these things? Well, foreign policy is domestic policy. Right? As president, I will bring the experience that I have of my 7 years in Congress, where I've worked on the Foreign Affairs Committee, met with leaders of other countries, worked on the Armed Services Committee, providing oversight over the Department of Defense, questioning and holding to account the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, working on the Homeland Security Committee, bringing this experience in national security and foreign policy, combined with my own personal experience as a soldier for almost 17 years, deploying twice the Middle East, understanding and experiencing firsthand who pays the price, who pays in the terribly high human cost of these wars that actually undermine our own national security interests, and that only serve to further line the pockets of the military-industrial complex the longer these unnecessary wars are waged. As president, I will end these regime change wars and nation-building missions, work to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, and instead bring those dollars, redirect our taxpayer dollars towards actually serving the needs of our people and our communities here at home. I want to give you an example of what this looks like in a very tangible way. How many of you here saw or read the news of the Afghanistan papers that were released? A few of you. If you haven't, I encourage you to look at it. The Washington Post released a few different series of articles that really outlined in a very clear way the egregious waste, fraud, and abuse that has occurred now over 3 different administrations related to the war in Afghanistan, needlessly sending more of our men and women in uniform to their deaths in Afghanistan, and spending over $1 trillion of our taxpayer dollars on a war that even leaders in the Pentagon were scratching their heads saying, well, why are we there? Why are we there? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? What does winning look like? We are still spending $4 billion every month in Afghanistan. Ongoing, as we are sitting here tonight, $4 billion a month. So that's even a big number. You know, over $1 trillion in Afghanistan's a big number. We're not even talking about Iraq and Syria and all the other places. Let's break it down, $4 billion a month in Afghanistan. You break that down even farther. That's $5.5 million every hour. Every hour. $5.5 million. 24 hours a day. That's what brings us to $4 billion a month. So as we talk about rebuilding and paving our roads, as we talk about skyrocketing costs of medicine and healthcare, as we talk about better pay for our teachers, this is what we're talking about. Instead of allowing leaders in our country to continue to squander our hard-earned taxpayer dollars, as president, I will put your priorities first. Put the people ahead of the military-industrial complex and the ones who have profited most off of these endless regime change wars. Putting country first, putting people ahead of profits and ahead of politics, and actually, once again, making sure that our government is working for us. And thank you for your service. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we don't have more time here. Want to make sure we've got some time if you want to come up and just say a quick hello or take a picture before we have to clean up and get out of here. But I want to first invite Vince.
Hey everyone, I'm Vince. So I'm almost one of you. I live in Nashua. I've been there about 6 years. And, I've personally been following Tulsi since 2015. And so I knew I liked her policies. And I remember turning on the TV one day, it was probably back in March, and I just saw what it was going to be, right? How the media was treating her. I understood she had made a pledge not to take PAC money. So things were always going to be a little difficult for us. So I decided to throw my name in onto Tulsi2020.com and volunteer. And my first day, I went to an event in Exeter, and I didn't know anyone. There was about 20 volunteers there, and Tulsi was on her way in, about to speak. And I think I went out for a cigarette or something. I decided to sign wave right around the corner. She barely made eye contact with me. She gave me a nod. She went in. By the end of the night, when we're taking photographs, I got the opportunity to meet her. She already knew my name. That's the kind of person she is. So I want to kind of share all that with all you guys. This is a pledge card. We're going to have volunteers hand them out. The idea is if you want to commit to talking to 2 people over the next 2 days, or if you want to throw a house party, or any ideas you might have, if you like what you heard today and you want to stay involved, you may not have all the time in the world, but you want to pitch in, fill these out, and we'll follow up with you. And, this is how grassroots work. This is what's gotten us this far. So we'd be welcome for your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. The ending of that story that he told at that town hall in Exeter was that Vince actually stuck around until the end of the night. Everybody had gone. He helped to pack up the chairs and the tables and everything that night. And I remember he was sitting on the stage just kind of looking around at the end. Right, Vince? I remember. And I came up to him and I asked him for his help and his support. And he said yes. And I told him, I'm counting on you. And Vince has and continues to work tirelessly as one of our incredible volunteer leaders, along with the many others that we have here tonight who really are the fuel behind this people-powered campaign. And it's because of people like Vince that we are able to use as getting contributions. We have over 200,000 contributions from people across the country. We take no PAC money, no lobbyist money, and we're able to maximize those dollars that people are contributing to our campaign to be able to continue to spread this message, to continue to push our campaign forward. So I'm grateful for all of this incredible support. Election day is on February 11th here in New Hampshire. Who already knew that? Good. That's good. It's coming up quick. It's coming up quick. So I just want to personally invite you and ask every one of you for your support, because you are the difference. We are the change. And as Abraham Lincoln said, if we stand firm, we shall not fail. If you are leaving here tonight committed and you want to support our campaign, please do stop and fill out one of those pledge cards. We'd love to engage you in our campaign. If you're leaving tonight and you're still undecided, you're still thinking things over, that's great. I'm grateful you're keeping an open mind. I still ask you to just talk about what you experienced and what you heard tonight with your friends or coworkers or with your family as you think about this really important decision you have before you about who you would like to see serve as Commander-in-Chief. There is so much at stake here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to present to you here tonight personally, and I really appreciate your consideration. Thank you so much again for coming. Have a great night. Aloha.
Guys, we're going to do a picture line on this side of the room, in and out this way.